In the volatile world of the young and the restless, Saturday's full March 28, some shocks do more than explode in the moment. They burrow deep, cracking trust, reopening old wounds, and leaving entire families struggling to recognize themselves afterward. Patty's return has exactly that kind of destructive force. The chaos does not begin with a scream or a confrontation, but with the emotional wreckage left behind. When Kyle sees his family pushed into another nightmare, Diane falls apart under the weight of old fears, and Jack becomes trapped in a situation that looks almost impossible to explain. What makes it worse is that this is not just another crisis. It is the kind of crisis that exposes every weakness that was already there, waiting for the right spark to set it off. Kyle's reaction is not simply about blame. It is about helplessness disguised as anger. When he, Billy, and Diane found Jack, what they saw was not only a man in danger. They saw a father, a husband, and the center of the Abbott family caught in a humiliating, disturbing, and deeply confusing situation. Instead of finding Jack as the clear victim of some outside threat, they found him with Patty, and that image alone was enough to trigger emotional damage before logic ever had a chance to catch up. Kyle knows what everyone else knows. Jack had been drugged. Patty refused to accept rejection. On paper, the facts should make Jack the obvious victim. But emotions do not work on paper. They work through shock, instinct, and fear, and in that moment, Kyle's fear turns outward. He needs someone to hold responsible, and the easiest person to target is the man at the center of the scandal. That is what makes Kyle's anger both understandable and unfair. He is not reacting only to what happened that day. He is reacting to years of instability, years of family drama, years of watching the people he loves get dragged into emotional disasters that always seem to leave scars behind. So, when he sees Diane already shaken before the full truth is revealed, his frustration becomes even more intense. To him, Jack is not just a victim in this moment. He is also the man whose life keeps colliding with chaos and whose chaos keeps spilling onto everyone else. It is a painful judgment and not entirely a fair one, but it is a very human one. Diane, meanwhile, suffers in a way that feels even more fragile. Before Jack was found with Patty, she was already emotionally rattled, as if some part of her sensed that disaster was closing in. That is what makes this twist so cruel. It does not merely hurt her. It confirms every fear she has tried to suppress. Diane has worked hard to rebuild her place in Jack's life, to be seen as someone worthy of stability rather than suspicion. Patty's return threatens all of that at once. Patty is not just a dangerous woman from the past. She is a symbol of everything Diane can never fully control: old obsessions, unresolved history, and the terrible truth that one moment can undo years of rebuilding. So when Diane sees Jack in Patty's orbit, even under circumstances that clearly suggest he was manipulated, the damage is immediate. She is not only devastated by what happened to him, she is devastated by what it does to her own sense of security. She has spent so much time trying to believe that the worst is behind them, and now the past has burst back into the present in the ugliest possible way. That kind of emotional collapse is hard to watch because it is not rooted in melodrama alone. It comes from a place of genuine vulnerability. Diane is shaken because she knows how quickly trust can crack when fear gets involved. Jack's position is perhaps the most frustrating of all. Rationally, he should be the person receiving protection and sympathy. He was drugged, he was cornered, he was placed in a compromising situation against his will. But soap opera logic and even human emotion in general rarely stay neatly aligned with reason. Jack is not just fighting to prove that he was harmed. He is fighting the image of what others saw and the emotional conclusions they drew from it. That may be the cruelest part of all. Sometimes the truth is not enough to protect someone from fallout. Sometimes the appearance of scandal carries its own power, and the damage begins long before anyone pauses to fully understand the facts. Patty's return guarantees that this crisis will not stay contained within one family. Her presence always brings instability because she does not just create danger. She reactivates buried fear. She reminds everyone of how vulnerable they really are when obsession enters the room. And while the Abbotts are dealing with the emotional wreckage she leaves behind, Victor is already looking at the situation from a colder angle. His reveal of a dangerous new secret weapon suggests that he is not merely observing the chaos, he is preparing to exploit it. That is classic Victor. He rarely wastes a moment of weakness in someone else. If the Abbott family is distracted, fractured, and emotionally off balance, he will see opportunity where others see trauma. That is exactly why Nikki's role becomes so important. Her questions for Kane about the fallout from the fake kidnapping are not casual. They come from a growing sense that the consequences of these schemes are becoming too large, too reckless, and too personal to ignore. Nikki understands Victor better than almost anyone, and that may be precisely why she is so unsettled. She knows that when Victor starts moving pieces behind the scenes, he usually believes the ends will justify the means. But she also knows that every time he pushes too far, the cost lands not only on his enemies, but on the people standing closest to him. That is where the danger to their marriage begins to feel real. Victor may believe he is protecting his empire or defending his family or staying 10 steps ahead of everyone else, but Nikki is starting to see the deeper truth. His schemes may be poisoning the very life he claims to protect. Fairly speaking, that is what makes this entire storyline so compelling. No one is completely wrong and no one is completely innocent emotionally, even if some characters are clearly more victimized than others. Kyle is wrong to blame Jack so harshly, but his fear for Diane makes his reaction believable. Diane is not wrong to feel shattered, even if Jack did not betray her willingly. Jack deserves compassion, but he is also trapped in the kind of scandal that inevitably hurts the people around him. Nikki has every reason to challenge Victor, yet she remains tied to a man whose greatest strength has always been his willingness to go too far. There is pain on every side, and that is where the drama becomes strongest. What matters now is not just what happened, but what each person chooses to do with the emotional aftermath. Kyle may push too hard and drive a deeper wedge into the family. Diane may reach a point where she can no longer separate Jack's victimhood from her own humiliation. Jack may grow bitter over being doubted when he needs support the most. Victor may keep escalating, convinced that power will solve problems that are actually emotional at their core. And Nikki may finally decide that loyalty to her husband cannot mean silence anymore. That is the real danger of a storyline like this. The initial shock is only the beginning. The true damage comes later when fear hardens into resentment, when loyalty turns into accusation, and when people start making choices based on pain rather than trust. The Abbott family may survive Patty's latest disruption, but survival and healing are not the same thing. Once a family starts seeing each other through the lens of suspicion, it becomes much harder to return to love without conditions. And Victor, as always, may believe he is the smartest man in the room. But even for him, there is a limit. If his new weapon, his manipulations, and his hunger for control keep pushing Nikki to the edge, he may discover too late that power can win battles while destroying the only relationship strong enough to challenge him, honestly. That would be the ultimate irony. A man so obsessed with controlling outcomes may end up engineering his own personal collapse. In the end, this is what makes the storyline work so well. It is not only about Patty's return or Jack's humiliation or Victor's plotting. It is about what happens when old ghosts step back into the light and everyone is forced to confront the parts of themselves they would rather keep hidden. Kyle's anger, Diane's heartbreak, Jack's helplessness, Nikki's suspicion, and Victor's ruthless ambition all collide in a way that feels dangerous because it is not just external conflict. It is emotional warfare. And in Genoa City, emotional warfare is often far more destructive than any public scandal because once trust begins to rot from the inside, even the strongest marriage, the strongest family, and the strongest name can start to fall apart. In The Young and the Restless, the most dangerous storms are never the ones that arrive loudly. They are the ones that begin in silence, in the uneasy pause after a crisis in the space where people are trying to convince themselves that the worst has already passed. Patty's disappearance after Jack was found should have brought relief, a fragile sense that the nightmare had ended before it could spiral further. But in Genoa City, calm is rarely a resolution. It is a warning. And this particular calm feels unnatural, like the quiet before something far more calculated begins to unfold. Jack is not recovering the way people expect him to. On the surface, he has been pulled out of danger, physically safe, surrounded by family. But internally, something has shifted, in a way that is far more unsettling than any visible injury. There is a lingering sense of violation that does not fade simply because the immediate threat is gone. Being drugged, being placed in a situation he could not control, being seen in a compromising position that he did not choose, these are not experiences that disappear once the facts are clarified. They stay reshaping how a person sees themselves. And perhaps more dangerously, they reshape how others see them. Jack now faces a reality where he must not only process his own trauma, but also repair the perception that he was somehow complicit in his own humiliation. That is a cruel burden, and it is already beginning to wear on him in ways that could push him toward decisions driven by pride rather than clarity. Diane senses this shift, and it terrifies her more than Patty ever did. Before Jack was found, Diane was already unraveling under the weight of uncertainty, but now she is confronted with something even harder to face. The man she loves is no longer just a victim. He is a man struggling with anger, shame, and a need to reclaim control. Diane recognizes that pattern because she has lived it herself. She knows how quickly pain can turn into defensiveness, how easily defensiveness can become distance, and how distance can destroy even the strongest bonds. Her fear is not only that Jack might drift away from her emotionally, but that the shadow of Patty's obsession will linger in their relationship long after Patty herself has vanished. And if that shadow remains, then their marriage is no longer threatened by an external force. It is threatened from within. Kyle, meanwhile, refuses to let go of his anger, and that anger is becoming more focused, more deliberate. At first it was an emotional reaction, a son lashing out at a situation that made no sense. But now, as the dust settles, Kyle's frustration is hardening into something sharper. He begins to question not just what happened, but why it happened in the first place. Why was Jack vulnerable to Patty at all? Why does chaos always seem to find its way back into their lives? And perhaps most dangerously, why does it feel like someone might have orchestrated this? Kyle is no longer satisfied with surface explanations. He wants accountability, and if he cannot find it, he is willing to create his own version of the truth. From a personal perspective, this is where Kyle becomes particularly compelling. His anger is justified in emotion, but dangerous in execution. When someone starts searching for answers with the assumption that there must be a villain, they often end up creating one, whether or not it truly exists. And then there is Victor Newman, moving through all of this with a calm that feels anything but innocent. When he begins to hint at a new secret weapon, it does not come across as a defensive strategy. It feels like an admission that he has already set something in motion. Victor does not react to chaos, he designs it. The possibility that he may have played a role in Patty's release is not just shocking, it is disturbingly logical. Victor has always understood that the most effective way to weaken an opponent is not through direct attack, but through emotional destabilization. And what better way to destabilize Jack than to unleash someone who embodies his most chaotic past? If this theory is true, then Victor's actions cross into a territory that is difficult to justify even by his own standards. Manipulating a volatile individual like Patty is not just strategic, it is reckless. It is the kind of move that assumes complete control over variables that are inherently uncontrollable. Patty is not a weapon that can be aimed and then safely contained. She is a force that can turn on anyone at any time. And that raises a crucial question about Victor's mindset. Has he reached a point where winning matters more than the potential collateral damage? Because if that is the case, then the threat he poses is no longer limited to his enemies. It extends to everyone within his orbit. Nikki begins to sense this shift before anyone else fully acknowledges it. There is a difference between Victor being ruthless and Victor being careless, and she is starting to see signs of the latter. Her unease grows not from any single action, but from the pattern she recognizes. Secrets, manipulation, and an increasing willingness to push boundaries without explanation. Nikki has spent years understanding Victor, defending him, and at times even enabling him. But there comes a point where understanding becomes complicity, and complicity becomes something she can no longer live with. Her questions are no longer gentle. They carry an edge of urgency, as if she knows that if she does not confront this now, she may lose not just her marriage, but her sense of self within it. What makes this situation even more volatile is the possibility that Patty herself is no longer the same person she once was. If she truly believes she has changed, if she genuinely seeks redemption, then she is not just a threat, she is a contradiction. A person capable of both destruction and regret. That duality makes her far more unpredictable than a straightforward antagonist. If she begins to realize that she has been used, that her actions may have been manipulated by someone like Victor, then her reaction could be explosive in ways no one anticipates. Redemption stories in this world are rarely clean. They are messy, painful, and often come too late to repair the damage already done. But they also carry the potential for something unexpected. If Patty turns against the forces that used her, she could become the catalyst for exposing a much larger scheme. Jack, however, may not be in a position to see that possibility. His focus is narrowing, driven by a need to regain control over his own narrative. He cannot accept being seen as weak, manipulated, or pitied. That need pushes him toward confrontation, toward decisions that prioritize reclaiming power over understanding the full scope of what he is dealing with, and that is where the real danger lies. When someone acts out of wounded pride, they often overlook the bigger picture. Jack may believe he is fighting back, but he could be stepping directly into a trap that has been carefully constructed around him. Diane's fear intensifies as she watches this unfold. She sees the signs of escalation, the subtle shift from recovery to retaliation, and she understands where that path can lead. She has lived through enough chaos to recognize that once a cycle of revenge begins, it rarely ends cleanly. Her instinct is to hold on, to stabilize, to prevent Jack from going too far, but her influence is limited by the very thing she fears most. Jack's growing need for independence, for control, for distance from anything that reminds him of vulnerability. And if he begins to see Diane not as a source of support, but as a reminder of his weakness, then their marriage is already in more danger than either of them is willing to admit.